In my opinion, Amenhotep III was ancient Egypt's greatest pharaoh.
It's the world's most powerful family, but much of their history has remained untold.
He presided over the zenith of Egyptian culture and civilization.
And when you hear the truth about who they really were, you will understand why their rule single-handedly shaped the next 3,000 years. And it all started with an ambitious young man who wanted to rule the world. A millennia and a half after the 18th dynasty had ended, a Greek historian wrote the following: "The Egyptians, graced by the gods themselves, have forged an eternal legacy through their monumental edifices and just laws. Their wisdom and strength have conferred upon them a power that defies the limits of mortal time." His name was Diodorus Siculus. The pillars of history sing the wisdom that will build our tomorrow. And these were the pillar figures that set in motion what begat modernism. In the mid-19th century, when the marriage scarab of Amenhotep III and Queen Tiye was discovered, archaeologists didn't just discover one instance of it. They discovered hundreds spread out over a region that was unexpected. This sent shockwaves in the world of archaeology. The 3,000-year-old scarabs weren't just an artifact of beauty, almost intact, but what its inscription said helped cement the 18th dynasty as one of the high points of the ancient Egyptian empire, the Nubio-Kemetic Empire, one where their military and economic mights combined to help them spread their cultural and scientific gifts. And in its few words, this scarab told us a great deal. Quote, "Lived the Horus, strong bull, arising in truth. The two ladies, establishing laws, pacifying the two lands. The golden Horus, great of valor, smiting the Asiatics. King of Upper and Lower Egypt, lord of the two lands. Nebmatra, son of Re. Amenhotep, ruler of Thebes, given life, and the great royal wife Tiye, may she live. The name of her father is Yuya. The name of her mother is Chuyu. She is the wife of a mighty king whose southern boundary is as far as Karoy, Upper Nubia, Kush, and whose northern boundary is as far as Naharan, Mitanni, in Syria, Mesopotamia." End quote. Did you catch that? Mitanni is in northeastern Syria. That means Amenhotep III had successfully taken his troops past Jordan, past Lebanon, into Syria, and all the way to northeastern Syria. That easily qualifies as one of the largest empires in ancient times. And we will see how, just like his conquered territories, Amenhotep did everything in dimensions larger than life. In the Egyptian Museum in Berlin, there is a large head statue that was discovered in the workshop of the royal sculptor in the Amarna period. It is thought to be the head of Amenhotep III. There are many other depictions of Amenhotep III, and I am struck by how youthful and strong-looking he is depicted in his various representations. But this recently discovered statue of the king is more telling of his likeness. In 2010, in the Mortuary temple of Amenhotep III, a double statue featuring King Amenhotep III with the falcon-headed sun god Rekhmire was made at the pharaoh's funerary temple, located on the west bank of the Nile. The craftsmanship on this hardest of stone is exquisite and speaks to the immense power and wealth that he commanded. And this wealth and power was put in full display in one of the largest temples ever built by man, a temple that unfortunately didn't survive the elements. The temple faced to the east, most likely due to the sun rising in the east, since Amenhotep III revered the sun god Amun. The colossi of Memnon can be found at the front of the Mortuary temple. As one enters, the long hypostyle hall leads to the peristyle sun court, and the whole area is surrounded by 3 pylons, also known as gates. The sun court is divided into the north and south halves and consists of statues of Amenhotep III and the gods. The north side had brown quartzite statues from Lower Egypt, while the south side had red granite statues from Aswan and Upper Egypt. The temple complex was enormous. It measured 328 feet, 100 meters, wide by 1,968 feet, 600 meters, in length, which is longer than 5 American football fields placed end to end. There's also a 3D reconstruction of the inside of the temple by Paul Francois and Frank Monnier. I think this is how ancient Egyptian art is supposed to be seen. When you see it with the wall reliefs and the gold-plated furniture and pylons, it projects an image of power and perfection. When the mummy of Amenhotep III was discovered as part of the massive royal cache in Thebes, Luxor, in 1881, scientists had to wait until 2010 to get authorization to perform DNA studies. And what they found was surprising. It showed that Amenhotep III's antecedent was closely related to the Central, Southern, and Western Africans. It showed that the king had a 93% genetic affinity with sub-Saharan Africans. But as great as Amenhotep III was, he was really following in the shadows of another pharaoh who lived a century earlier. A pharaoh that most consider as one of the best military minds in the ancient world. One of those pharaohs that extended Egypt well into the Levant. This is the Without History channel. Every episode, we bring salient facts about African ancient civilizations and history, and detail how these civilizations contributed to our modern world. We dive deep into what research has to say about the often overlooked or misattributed contributions of these key eras in our collective history. Without History does not accept any sponsorship precisely so that we can remain independent. And it is through all your small donations on Patreon, YouTube, and those who share our videos on their social media that we are able to continue our work. Even though they are separated by 3 generations, the resemblance between both Amenhotep III and Thutmose III is striking, from the high cheekbones to their almost identical lips and almond-shaped eyes. His long limbs, thin waist, and broad shoulders are characteristics that appear frequently in Nubio-Kemetic motifs, but for the king, they confer a sense of supreme elegance. A tall and handsome man who was also a shrewd commander, maybe as astute as another African commander that would follow him a millennia and a half later. In fact, it is possible that Hannibal studied Thutmose because the strategy employed by Thutmose in his defeat of the coalition of Levantines in the Battle of Megiddo mirrors that of Hannibal's. On inscriptions at Karnak, based on the scribe Cheneni's journal, detail Thutmose III's Megiddo campaign. Thutmose gathered an Egyptian army of 10 to 20,000 men against the king of Kadesh, who had assembled a coalition of 15,000 near Megiddo. Reaching Yehem, after marching from the border fortress Jaru via Gaza, Thutmose faced the Carmel range. Scouts identified 3 routes to Megiddo. Northern and southern routes were safer but longer, while the central Aruna Pass, Wadi Ara, was direct but dangerously narrow, allowing only single-file passage. His generals pleaded for him to take a safer route, fearing ambush in the ravine. However, Thutmose reasoned his enemy would expect him on the easier paths precisely because his generals advised it. He decided to take the unexpected, risky Aruna route. The king of Kadesh had indeed left large detachments guarding the main routes, virtually ignoring Aruna. Thutmose himself led his army through the pass, using light infantry to clear resistance. Emerging into the Jezreel Valley unopposed, the Egyptian army gained a clear path to Megiddo, bypassing the main rebel forces positioned elsewhere. This gamble proved successful. It is fitting that Thutmose chose the god Osiris to accompany him in eternity. In his mortuary temple in Memphis, after having conquered the known world, Thutmose drew a larger-than-life depiction of his young self, giving thanks to the one God that gave him the strength and inspiration to overcome all other nations, and the God he chose to honor, Osiris. The same Osiris, whose statue was carved in the early days of Egypt during the pyramid building phase in this lifelike piece. The same god Osiris, who was the first in history to have died and then be brought back to life a few days later. And for thousands of years, his followers would seek the power of an eternal life after death through the miracle performed by Osiris. Of note, his son, the god Horus, has an equally familiar tale, a tale similar to Christ. And when I say Christ, I mean the original appellation of Horus that the ancient wrote with the letters K, R, S, and T. A story far older than 325 AD, when Emperor Constantine had religious entrepreneurs vote on what should or shouldn't be in the Bible during the First Council of Nicaea and the punishment for violating that council's edicts. History tells us that the life of the Egyptian deity, Horus, was plagiarized in establishing the tenets of today's major religions. And aside from being conceived by a virgin birth or a godly insemination, Horus went on to express the same views as stated in the Sermon of the Mount, those of morality and justice. Horus was worshipped by the people of the Nubio-Kemetic civilization for thousands of years just before the birth of the story of he who followed him and had an identical life to his. And this story would be carried to all the lands that Thutmose III and Amenhotep III brought under the tutelage of Kemet. One of the officials in the court of Thutmose III has left us astonishing records of his campaigns. On the walls of his tomb we can see depicted all nations that his lord and king subdued, and there are many. This rare picture of the wall of Rekhmire shows us the Levantine nations, but also the African nations, all of them reunited and coming to pay tribute to the pharaoh Thutmose. But they also show us the everyday Egyptians, the everyday Kemetu, as they tend to their respective duties. From the skilled artisan who is creating a vase made of stone, to the sculptors working in unison to create a colossal statue, and even the industrious worker fashioning a new chair. Of particular interest is that the Kemites and the African nations are drawn in the same hue, the same skin color. Here the Kemetu are on the right and the African nations on the left. They are virtually indistinguishable, and yet the Levantine is drawn in a completely distinctive color and body shape. This is not unique, as these representations of the different nations throughout the Egyptian civilization remain consistent. It is strange, however, that when you look at the Wikipedia page of Rekhmire, only the Levantine relief is shown, and some of the Levantine nations have all their faces removed. Not even one of the faces survived. They were not alone, because the nation of Keftiu falls in that same category. You can see them here having the same complexion as the Kemites and the Africans, but I will let you take a guess as to what that Keftiu nation is, and if you said the Phoenicians, you would be right. Indeed, the Phoenicians are one of the many nations that Thutmose subdued, and in their time, the Phoenicians, Keftiu, were another nation of Africans. This is corroborated by the Greeks. For those who have seen our documentary on Phoenicia, this isn't surprising. In this last image of the mural of the tomb of Rekhmire, we can see another nation of Asiatics. And what do we notice? We notice that they are a various ethnic mix. And this would make sense, because if some of the Asiatics were pure Arab and the Phoenicians were black as shown, then there would be multiple areas in the region that are composed of a mix of both races, if not more. To get a sense of how much influence the kings and queens of the 18th dynasty had, it is good to read the correspondence between some of the Asiatic kings and the pharaohs, and one goes as follows. Say to Nefertiti, the king of Egypt, my brother, thus Bernaburius, the king of Caradunius, your brother. For me all goes well. For you, your wives, your household, your sons, your horses, your chariots, may all go very well. When I presented my daughter to Yamasi, your messenger, and to Mihuni the interpreter, they poured oil on the head of my daughter. But as to the one taking her to you, who is going to take her? With you there are 5 chariots. Are they going to take her to you in 5 chariots? Should I in these circumstances allow her to be brought to you from my house? My neighboring kings would say, they have transported the daughter of a great king to Egypt in 5 chariots. When my father allowed his daughter to be brought to your father, 3,000 soldiers with him. From this correspondence, we can see that not only is the Asiatic king eager to offer another one of his daughters to the pharaoh, but he wants to make sure that if it is done, it should be done in proper manner. But the Amarna letters also contain long records of trading manifests. Archaeologists have found a gold scarab bearing the name of Nefertiti at a shipwreck near Uluburun, Grand Cape in Turkey. Many of the objects found on the ship match the description of objects traded in the Amarna letters. I will let you admire the quality of the golden amulets, pendants, and chains that Kemet was producing at the time. Keep these in mind as we will compare them to the items that were discovered in the tomb of her son, King Tut. So Thutmose III followed Hatshepsut, the queen pharaoh, who made Egypt so rich that she went on a temple building spree. He was followed 3 generations later by Amenhotep III, who reclaimed the Levant, and his wife Queen Tiye, before giving birth to the one everyone knows, who made sure that everyone knew of her husband's deeds by writing it on scarabs that she printed and hanged everywhere in the empire, but also in statues. And by statues, I mean colossal statues. Whereas most pharaohs are depicted in the statues alone, Amenhotep III was carved alongside his queen in a 21-foot, 7 meters high statue. A veritable work of art and precision. And here again in this statue, we cannot but marvel at the extreme beauty of Queen Tiye. As she gently reaches and puts her hand in the back of her loving husband, a gesture captured in larger-than-life eternity. See that blob over to the left? That is a man standing next to the statue. It gives you a sense of how gigantesque this carving is. The prominence of Queen Tiye and her family in this scarab will lead one to believe that she had a hand in writing it, and an even bigger hand in its distribution all over the empire. And she definitely had a hand in making sure that her portraits survived through the ages in multiple representations. I particularly like the attention paid to her distinctive features like her lower lip, which remained generous even as she aged, a bit protruding because of her subnasal prognathism. How her crown complements her hair braids is very reminiscent of how the Aten women of West Africa wear their golden crown during their wedding ceremonies, a tradition that they have kept for millennia since their migration from Kemet, as their traditions and genetic studies have shown. And if you hadn't been convinced by her vanity yet, then this exaggerated and prominent royal diadem, reminiscent of both a crown and symbol worn by Egyptian gods on their heads, should win you over. We can be sure that the instructions to the royal artists were precise, and certainly came from her. We can really see how beautiful of a young lady Queen Tiye was in her young age, a beauty fitting of her son that she brought to the world. One of the most famous pharaohs, and certainly one of the most handsome pharaohs of all time. When you look at Queen Tiye's mummy, something doesn't seem to fit. As I often say, when something is true, it becomes easy to find evidence to support it. You must be asking yourself, how is it that in all her depictions she is shown her with braided woolly hair, but her mummy has silky, only slightly curly hair? And also, how come the rest of the mummy shows authentic signs of being 3,000 years old, but her hair looks brand new and almost glued onto the scalp? There are a few possibilities. I won't cite them all here, but we know that the Kemetu treated the hair of the deceased with preservatives, and we know those fats and resins changed the hair color, making it reddish. We also know that ancient Egyptian women often straightened their hair. There was a whole hair industry in ancient Egypt for both men and women. Egyptian women loved spending time and money on their hair, and they created various gels for their needs. Rendered animal fats were common ingredients in cosmetic unguents and would have been applied to hair to make it supple, manageable, and provide hold for styles. Several plant-based oils were available and likely used on hair, including castor oil. Known to be cultivated and used, castor oil is excellent for conditioning. Almond oil, valued for cosmetic and likely hair use. Moringa oil, ben oil, used in perfumes and unguents. It's moisturizing. Sesame oil and olive oil, also potentially used. They would top the whole thing with beads and jewelry for those who could afford it. But the hair of the queen can tell us something more. Using a trichometer, one can measure the width of hair strands of an individual. Czech anthropologist Eugene Struhal conducted a study in the 1970s focused on analyzing the hair of pre-dynastic Egyptians. The study found that the hair indices of pre-dynastic Egyptians range from 35 to 65 micrometers. This index is a measure of the cross-sectional diameter of hair strands, which can indicate hair texture. Sub-Saharan African hair, known for its kinky texture, averages around 60 micrometers. European hair averages around 71 micrometers, and East Asian, including Chinese, hair averages around 83 micrometers. Struhal went on to conclude, and I quote, "The outline of the cross-sections of the hairs was flattened, with indices ranging from 35 to 65. These peculiarities also show the Negroid inference among the Badarians, pre-dynastic Egyptians." End quote. But he wasn't alone. In yet another study, hair samples of mummies from the 18th to the 25th dynasty produced an average index of 51, which means their hair was very kinky. Regardless, we know what Queen Tiye's hair looked like when she was alive, not just from the multiple surviving depictions of her, but also from her DNA that we will see in this next section.
It's Big B, the prolific producer.
In 2010, very precise DNA testing was done on the following mummies, and you will recognize the names of the first two mummies as they appeared in the scarab that Queen Tiye herself had printed during her marriage and shipped to the four corners of the empire. Thuya being her mother and Yuya being her father. And what do we notice? That their DNA analysis shows that they are more than 94% sub-Saharan African, or more than 94% infra-Saharan African. This is in line with all her depictions and the depictions of that of her son and grandson, Akhenaten and King Tutankhamun. So by inference, Queen Tiye with parents that have 93% genetic affinity with infra-Saharan Africans, and with children that have the same genetic affinity, could not have been anything else than a black woman. But if you search the internet for the DNA results of Queen Tiye, you will find a study commissioned by Dr. Zahi Hawass that claims that Queen Tiye's belong to the mitochondrial DNA group K. The implications being that she may have been European or Levantine. This is highly misleading because haplogroup K is found everywhere from Europe to the Levant and East Africa. What's more, this haplogroup isn't determinative at all of where a subject comes from. With almost every large empire in history, when it becomes too large and extends itself too quickly, it is often followed by a spectacular collapse. And this is exactly what the son of Amenhotep and Queen Tiye tried to prevent when he inherited a kingdom that had become the most powerful in ancient times. Many call him the heretic, and that is probably accurate. From the point of view of the traditional Kemetu, Akhenaten was a very disruptive figure. As soon as he came to power, he immediately started to change the fabric of Kemetic society. The priests had become too strong, and they were crippling the economy and growth with their incessant demands and lavish offerings. It got to the point where during the 18th dynasty, there were 150 to 200 festival days in a year. And during those religious festivals, offerings would be made to the various temples and gods, benefiting the priest class directly. Remember that in Kemet, the priests were not just religious figures, they were also the learned individuals, the savants, those same priests from which the Greek philosophers learned their sciences from. From Solon to Pythagoras to Thales to Euclid to Democritus, there is virtually no great Greek savant that didn't go to Egypt to learn from the priests. So these priests were not only holding the key to the people's faith, they also held considerable power, as they were the ones that knew how to build temples, knew the formulas for various medical treatments, and held the knowledge of astronomy. But that ruling class was now choking Egypt. They had stagnated in their ability to innovate, probably because they had created a separation of knowledge between the population and themselves. And an empire that doesn't innovate is at the mercy of being invaded by those who have better technology and a better economy. So Pharaoh Akhenaten, in an effort to save the empire from the priest class, tried to consolidate power around the crown. He recognized that priests were attaching themselves to individual deities that they marketed for their own benefits. He also realized that the economic output of Kemet was suffering. Even though they were still militarily strong thanks to the superhuman Nubian archers that could run for days without water and hit a 6-inch target 100 meters away. This advantage would not last forever, so his move to monotheism is regarded by some scholars as a way for him to save Egypt. The priest class had gone out of control. They were essentially siphoning any excess economic activity from Egypt into their own pockets. This created an enormous amount of corruption and hijacked wealth and development that could have gone into developing a modernizing Egypt. Akhenaten took notice of that, so he tried to bring back morality and true religious virtue by concentrating the strong religious devotion of the Africans into a single god that was one more tangible and two more moral. At least a morality that was not controlled by the priest and also by the virtue of the kings. This is why he tried to break free from everything that Egypt was. Akhenaten didn't just change the religion of Egypt. Akhenaten tried to change Kemet. He tried to change its political system. But in the end, it was too little too late. Egypt was already too big, and the large empire was sailing full mast towards the end of its apogee. But for all his efforts to reform Kemet at its height, it would be his wife that would become the face of ancient Egypt. It is a bit ironic that the most recognizable artifact of ancient Egypt is a proven fake. It has already been shown that Ludwig Borchardt, the archaeologist who claimed to have discovered it, used a picture of his young wife to model the Nefertiti bust that we have all become accustomed to. Nefertiti was even more beautiful. After her husband's death, some scholars believe that Nefertiti ruled briefly as the female pharaoh, known by the throne name Neferneferuaten, and before the ascension of Tutankhamun, although this identification is a matter of ongoing debate. If Nefertiti did rule as pharaoh, her reign was marked by the fall of Amarna and relocation of the capital back to the traditional city of Thebes. In this statue of Nefertiti and her husband, King Akhenaten, the true likeness of the couple can be seen. In this other wall painting, you can see her offering flowers to Akhenaten. This show of affection, hardly appropriate for the occasion, is a complete departure from traditional ancient Egyptian wall relief, but you can still make out her generous lips, her dolichocephaly, almond-shaped eyes, flat nose, and long limbs. There is a very rare carving of the face of a queen, almost certainly that of Nefertiti. This red granite little-known piece has its flat nose completely eroded and destroyed. There is another also, lesser-known depiction of her where the features are generous, where the features are more complete, and these seldom shown pieces align more with the wall painting from before. But in all this, I am beyond fascinated by the artisan's skills from the Amarna period. They were able to blend traditional Egyptian artistic convention with realism and flair. Although we don't see the same level of ungodly symmetry that we see with Ramses II's statues, it is clear that the artists were not focused on mathematical precision here. And if you still doubt how beautiful Nefertiti was, then this 18th dynasty propaganda should surely convince you. Her name, Nefertiti, comes from Nefer, which in Kemetic language symbolized beauty, perfection, and the concept of zero. And yes, unlike what we have been taught, the Africans from Kemet already had the concept of zero well before any other cultures. The second part of her names means has arrived. So Nefertiti means the beautiful one has come, or the perfect beauty has arrived. Nefertiti had a plethora of other titles. I will read them out to you along with the equivalent Nubio-Kemetic pronunciation. Nefer Nefer Uaten, beautiful is the beauty of Aten. Nefer Nefer Jitan, hereditary princess, Irit Pet. Great of praises, Waret Haziwet. Lady of grace, Nebet Imat, Nebet Jemat. Sweet of love, Beneret Merut. Lady of the two lands, Nebet Tawi. Main king's wife, his beloved, Hemet Nesut At Meretef. Great king's wife, his beloved, Hemet Nesut Weret Meretef. Lady of all women, Henut Hemut Nebut. Mistress of Upper and Lower Egypt, Henut Shemau Mehu. One of the two female mummies found in the royal cache KV21 has been suggested as the body of Nefertiti. DNA analysis did not yield enough data to make a definitive identification, but confirmed she was a member of the 18th dynasty royal line. CT scanning revealed she was about 45 at the time of her death. Her left arm had been bent over her chest in the queenly pose. The possible identification is based on her association with the mummy tentatively identified as Ankese na Mun. It is suggested that just as a mother and daughter, Tiye and the younger lady, were found lying together in KV55, the same was true of these mummies. We do, however, have the DNA analysis of her son King Tutankhamun, and we will see that in the next section. But I have a quiz for you. During the 3,000-year-long Egyptian civilization, there is one hieroglyph that was used to represent a face. Tap on the right answer on the screen, or write your answer in the comment. If you said this one, you would be right. He is the son of Akhenaten and the son of Nefertiti, so King Tutankhamun was destined to be famous. But as if this wasn't enough, he happens to be one of the only pharaoh whose tomb was discovered completely intact, with all its content. But it must have been incredibly difficult to follow in the footsteps of the failed revolution of his father. The boy was probably too young, and almost certainly heavily influenced by the priest class who wanted to regain and cement their control of the Kemetic economy. When archaeologist Howard Carter first stepped into the tomb of King Tut, he discovered a literal treasure cove, and everything pointed to the true origin of the tomb. These pictures you see here were taken by the official photographer who followed the main excavation party into the king's burial chamber. Over 5,000 items were recovered from the tomb of King Tutankhamun. This one tomb alone provided archaeologists with a wealth of knowledge that has significantly increased our understanding of the Nubian Kemetic civilization. A few items stand out. 2 identical golden staves were adorned with a statue of the king as a child. This gold-plated fan shows the king hunting. An inscription on the handle states that it is made of ostrich feathers obtained by His Majesty while hunting in the desert east of Heliopolis. Incidents from the hunt are depicted on both sides of the fan's palm. On one side, the king is represented riding in a chariot and drawing a bow. To keep his hands free, he has put the reins around his body. 2 wounded ostriches are about to be dispatched by the king's hound. Here again, the king's shrine was locked by an intricate knot and seal. Perhaps keen observers noted symbolism resembling 2 hands holding eternity. The sarcophagus of the king himself was guarded by none other than the goddess Isis. This picture shows the king in his majestic pose, with his crook and flail, clearly showing his African heritage, not just through his physical features, but also through symbolism used by kings in Africa to this day. These sarcophagus decorative paintings look like garments worn by people across Africa, from Ghana to Kenya. An Egyptian mummy was an embalmed body, wrapped according to a prescribed pattern in linen bandages. Protective charms, amulets, were placed between the layers of bandages so that they lay over the part of the body which they were intended to protect or to assist through the power of magic. By multiplying the layers of bandages, more and more amulets could be placed directly over any physical member. Placed like a sentinel at the entrance to the so-called treasury was a lifelike figure of a recumbent jackal upon a shrine which contained several pieces of jewelry. A typical African headdress, the substitute for a pillow, still used in Central and Eastern Africa today. Notice how closely this headdress resembles the golden stool of the Ashanti. This alabaster carving has symbolism that remains unexplained by Egyptologists to this day. On it we can see a typical Egyptian woman guiding the ship. His sandals design is typically African, especially with the separator positioned between the big toe and the others. I will leave the link to all these items in the description below. I highly recommend that history enthusiasts go through it. So, what do bones tell us about King Tut's origin? The arm span to height ratio is a measure of the proportion between a person's height and the length of their arms when their arms are stretched horizontally. It is also known to vary among different ethnicities. For example, people of African descent tend to have a higher ratio than those of European descent. The average ratio for African Americans or people of African descent is around 1.15, whereas for Europeans it is around 1.00, which means their arm span is about the same length as, or just below their height. Additionally, people of Asian descent tend to have lower ratios, with an average being slightly less than that of Europeans. This is useful, as it can help determine ethnicity if we have the measurements. When King Tut's arm span and height are measured, we can calculate his ratio. This is what we get. King Tut's arm span yields a ratio of 1.12, which is significantly longer than his height, indicating a clear, black African origin. But it doesn't stop at King Tut. In a brilliant expose, Trill Black also exposes the following quote back to the 1800s. Quote, estimates of living stature based on X-ray measurements applied to the Trotter and Gleaser, 1958. Negro equations for the femur, tibia, and humerus have been made for ancient Egyptian kings belonging to the 18th and 19th dynasties. It is shown that the limbs of the pharaohs, like those of other ancient Egyptians, had negroid characteristics, in that the distal segments were relatively long in comparison with the proximal segments. But there is one more element that confirms King Tut's antecedents, and it is one that is both a blessing and a curse. In 2010, when DNA and pathological studies were done on the mummy of King Tut, they discovered that he had sickle cell disease. Now this is very interesting because sickle cell disease, SCD, is a group of inherited red blood cell disorders. People with SCD have abnormal hemoglobin, one called hemoglobin S or sickle hemoglobin, in their red blood cells. 2 hemoglobin is the protein in red blood cells that carries oxygen throughout the body. Normal red blood cells are round, flexible discs that move easily through blood vessels. In SCD, under certain conditions, like low oxygen levels, dehydration, or stress, the abnormal hemoglobin S causes red blood cells to become stiff, sticky, and change shape into a crescent or sickle form. This change in shape in the red blood cell provides great immunity against deadly forms of malaria, but also causes serious health issues for individuals that carry 2 copies of the gene. Whereas 1 in 58,000 Caucasians carry SCD or SCT, about 1 in 10 African Americans have it, and this is due to their African antecedents, and it is not just sickle cell. That shows that King Tut was a black African. His Y DNA analysis has been shown to be E1b, 1a, or M2, just like the majority of ancient Egyptians throughout the 3,000-year duration of the empire. And E1b1a is essentially a haplogroup that is associated with infra-Saharan Africa. Here is its dispersal map. And if you are wondering, why is there E1b1a in America? That is because almost all African Americans carry the E1b1a gene. But when a complete genetic analysis was done of King Tut, it showed that his DNA had over 94% affinity with black Africans. There is debate as to how King Tut died. Recent research seems to suggest that he died from complications of sickle cell disease. This would make sense given the multiple depictions of him with a cane, indicating that he had consistent ailment during his life. Evidence of bone deformity consistent with the disease was also found on the king's remains. Clearly, the frequent Egyptian practice of inbreeding to keep the royal line pure did not serve the 18th dynasty well. Other evidence points to a more nefarious end. If he was assassinated, it would probably have been by the machinations of the power-hungry Horemheb, a general of the army during the time of Akhenaten who became pharaoh through nebulous circumstances. Probably a mercenary who rose quickly through the ranks. He is not of noble blood. Upon his ascension to power, Horemheb immediately destroyed all evidence of the reign of Akhenaten and the other Amarna rulers. In my estimation, Horemheb got rid of the boy king and his successor Ai, and stashed his body and all that was remotely linked to Amarna in his tomb. He would have been more than happy to do so, as it was more important for him to regain the trust of the polytheistic priest who wanted Kemet to return to the old days before Akhenaten, when they could demand wealth and favors in their 200 days per year festivals. This would explain why in the tomb of King Tut, so many items from his father were present, including the golden chair. It would also explain why the tomb was never found until the 19th century, because Horemheb probably killed anyone that was involved in the burial of the king and the disposal of everything that was linked to the Amarna period, which he dumped in the tomb of the boy king. Upon his ascension to power, Horemheb immediately destroyed all evidence of the reign of Akhenaten and the other Amarna rulers. In my estimation, Horemheb got rid of the boy king and his successor Ai, and stashed his body and all that was remotely linked to Amarna in his tomb. He would have been more than happy to do so, as it was more important for him to regain the trust of the polytheistic priest who wanted Kemet to return to the old days before Akhenaten, when they could demand wealth and favors in their 200 days per year festivals. This would explain why in the tomb of King Tut, so many items from his father were present, including the golden chair. It would also explain why the tomb was never found until the 19th century, because Horemheb probably killed anyone that was involved in the burial of the king and the disposal of everything that was linked to the Amarna period, which he dumped in the tomb of the boy king. It is fitting that this act of betrayal not only marked the end of the 18th dynasty, but also the beginning of the 19th dynasty, with the new appointed pharaoh, Ramses I, whose head statue you can see here. But why was King Tut's dad, Akhenaten, so hated by his own? And why did he try to so drastically reform Kemet? Was Akhenaten crazy? Or did he see something that only a visionary leader could see? When you read the writings of Akhenaten, you quickly realize that almost all religious texts of the region are a derivative of his writings. Aten was one of the first concepts of God to be presented as a symbol, without a human or animal form. According to some scholars, Aten was not the sun, but rather the sun is the symbol of Aten. Akhenaten figured that all of mankind and all living things are governed by the sun, making it a perfect symbol for God, because the sun is not connected to any specific people, culture, or land. In other words, the sun was the Kaaba of the religion of Akhenaten. Aten is truly the forerunner of the concept of the one God, and this was a genius move, because if it had worked, it would have extended the cultural influence of Kemet and made Kemet religion more easy to accept by those foreign lands which his father had just conquered. It would have made them willing participants into the Egyptian way of life, and thus the Egyptian economy. Because Kemetism wouldn't have just celebrated gods of black origin, but would have welcomed everyone. It would have created an empire not based on geography and ethnicity, but one based on belief. In some way he succeeded, but his success did not come at the right time. It arrived a few hundred years later, when those who would eventually call themselves the Jews fled Egypt and carried his message in the Levant away from those corrupt blind priests. And through their long march through the Sinai desert, they modified the hymn that Akhenaten had written to the sun god Aten, and kept some of the 42 laws of Ma'at, the traditional 42 laws of balance. They selected 10 of those to become the 10 Commandments, even down to the symbolism of the head crown of Akhenaten, preserved in priest's accoutrement till today. You can still hear the echoes of the hymn to Aten in the prayers of many of today's religions. Praise of Rekhmire, rejoicing on the horizon, and his name is Shu, who is in the Aten disk, living forever and ever, the living great Aten who is in Jubilee, Lord of all that the Aten encircles, Lord of heaven, Lord of earth, Lord of the house of Aten and Akhenaten, in praise of the King of Upper and Lower Kemet, who lives on truth, the Lord of the two lands, Nefertiti, Re, Wa and Re, the son of Re, who lives on truth, the Lord of diadems, Akhenaten, long in his lifetime, and praise of the chief wife of the king, his beloved the Lady of the Two Lands, Neferu Aten Nefertiti, living, healthy, and youthful forever and ever, by the fan-bearer on the right hand of the king. Akhenaten took great care in giving his beloved wife a lot of credit, an enormous amount, in fact. The love that Akhenaten showed his wife throughout all his life was remarkable. She was proclaimed in sacred texts. She was also depicted in multiple murals and statues. Her lovely, long, and dark braids were a feature that appeared repeatedly in all her reliefs. Her generous lips were always accurately portrayed. In fact, we know King Tutankhamun had the following genetic profile. This means that by count of relatable genetic material, he has a combined 3,200 count of sub-Saharan or infra-Saharan African genes. By comparison, his combined relatedness to North African, Levantine, or European genes is in the single digits. This means that if King Tut were walking down the street today, he could not be mistaken for anything other than a black man. And his DNA shows that he is the farthest thing away from the Levantine and the European combined. And as we know, there is no way that Pharaoh Tutankhamun was a pure sub-Saharan African without both of his parents being themselves pure black Africans, and his parents were none other than Queen Nefertiti and King Akhenaten. And as we have stated before, when something is true, then it becomes easy to find a mountain of evidence around that truth. For example, if King Tut was indeed a pure black African as his depictions and his DNA says, then King Tut's father, and possibly his uncle, had to have had a significant portion of his genetic material as infra-Saharan African too. Okay, then let's check. KV55 is a tomb in the Valley of the Kings in Egypt. It was discovered by Edward R. Ayrton in 1907 while he was working in the valley for Theodore M. Davis. It has long been speculated, as well as much disputed, that the body found in this tomb was that of the famous king, Akhenaten, who moved the capital to Akhetaten, modern-day Amarna. The results of genetic and other scientific tests published in February 2010 have confirmed that the person buried there was both the son of Amenhotep III and the father of Tutankhamun. So this means that the body found in the tomb, K55, is either Akhenaten or the brother of Akhenaten. And what did DNA testing of the mummy KV55 show? It showed that just like his son and his father, Akhenaten had over 92.8% genetic affinity with infra-Saharan Africans. And this isn't surprising given the DNA analysis of everybody in the king's family lineage. Nevertheless, the study of mummy K55 established that the age of this person at the time of his death was consistent with that of Akhenaten, thereby making it almost certain that it is Akhenaten's body. So let us recap the family tree of the 18th dynasty and see if we missed anyone, starting with Queen Hatshepsut, who opened trade routes to Punt, deep in Africa, probably Eritrea or Kenya, all the way to Syria, paving the way for the conquests that would follow with Thutmose III, the Hannibal of Ancient Egypt, and then his great-grandson, the Asiatic slayer, Pharaoh Amenhotep III and his beautiful wife, Queen Tiye. Queen Tiye's parents, Thuya and Yuya. Queen Tiye herself, who gave birth to the one who was mislabeled as the father of monotheism, the one who tried to reform Kemet to prevent its slow downfall, Akhenaten, his beautiful wife Nefertiti, and her son, the boy king, King Tut. All of them, every single one of them played a crucial role in the 18th dynasty, and all of them, one more beautiful than the next. Some of them, too powerful and too rich to have enjoyed a normal life. As I mentioned before, when something is true, it becomes easy to find evidence to support it. Especially a large event, then it becomes straightforward to find evidence that supports this. In Book 2 of the Histories, the father of history relates to us the following. Quote, "This king, Sesostris, also, they said, made a division of the soil of Egypt among the inhabitants. If the river carried away any portion of a man's lot, the king sent persons to examine and determine by measurement the exact extent of the loss. From this practice, I think, geometry first came to be known in Egypt, whence it passed into Greece." End quote. Plutarch has pointed out that Alexander III of Macedon learned his integrationist ideology from Kemet. We are told also that he, Alexander, listened to the teachings of Salmon the philosopher in Egypt and accepted most readily this utterance of his, namely, that all mankind are under the kingship of God, since in every case that which gets the mastery and rules is divine. It was because of this that Alexander had a falling out with Aristotle, who preached that Greeks are superior to non-Greeks, barbarians, which is also understandable because Alexander was a Macedonian, who are very technically non-Greeks, barbarians themselves. Before I leave you, I would like to address a gentle plea to the Egyptian authorities, especially to those who oversee the Egyptian Antiquities Department. For all those who have the capacity to see and the capacity to read, it is clear from the abundance of evidence that ancient Egypt was black. Not just at its beginning, with King Aha and King Narmer, but all the way through the New Kingdom. So much so that when the Greeks and the Romans came to the Delta, they still described the Egyptians as black-skinned with woolly hair. Notice I did not even say brown-skinned, but black-skinned. This is how the Greeks themselves described them with the term melas. Melas being the origin of the word melanin. My plea is to your better humanity, because it has become clear that an increasing number of artifacts from ancient Egypt are being altered or modified before they are released to the public. This malpractice even extends to artifacts that have already been discovered, where evidence shows deliberate manipulation intended to hide the Africanness of the evidence. Why this is the case, I will not venture to guess. I will, however, say that in the long term, this does not have the intended effect. If anything, as the truth is being discovered, it exposes the untrustworthy character of those in power in the land that we call Egypt today. Furthermore, in doing so, the same figures of authority are overlooking a significant opportunity, one where instead of seeing the black African heritage as less than that of the Arab world, they could use this history to demonstrate the truth of this joint humanity, just as Akhenaten tried to establish. Instead, they show that they are lacking in wisdom, virtue, and especially lacking in what the ancient Egyptians called ma'at, the quality of balance and virtue. Now that you have built your whole identity around the culture of another, it would be demeaning to yourself to continue in this line of action. But if you would dare to open your eyes, you would see how those who you claim are without history birthed civilization itself. It is fitting that in this age of identity crisis and misinformation, that the stories from 3,500 years ago are here to remind us all that in its height, ancient Egypt tried to reform itself into a society that was more accepting of all people. And it is corruption and hubris that caused that revolution to fail. And the lesson for every one of us is that the very thing that frees us and that will give us dominion over all aspects of life, including everyday failures. That thing is not an object that belongs to one people, but it is rather an idea that, when heeded, will free the mind of those with enough wisdom to not repeat the errors of the past. I will leave you with a reading of the 42 Laws of Ma'at. If you want to support Without History, make sure you share this video and add it to your history playlist. If you can spare the equivalent of a cup of coffee every month to support my work, I would be immensely grateful if you could join our Patreon or YouTube membership. Honor virtue. I benefit with gratitude. I am peaceful. I respect the property of others. I affirm that all life is sacred. I give offerings that are genuine. I live in truth. I regard all altars with respect. I speak with sincerity. I consume only my fair share. I offer words of good intent. I relate in peace. I honor animals with reverence. I can be trusted. I care for the earth. I keep my own counsel. I speak positively of others. I remain in balance with my emotions. I am trustful in my relationships. I hold purity in high esteem. I spread joy. I do the best I can. I communicate with compassion. I listen to opposing opinions. I create harmony. I invoke laughter. I'm open to love in various forms. I'm forgiving. I'm kind. I act respectfully of others. I am accepting. I follow my inner guidance. I converse with awareness. I do good. I give blessings. I keep the waters pure. I speak with good intent. I praise the goddess and the god. I am humble. I achieve with integrity. I advance through my own abilities. I embrace the all. Special thanks to the debunker, an unending source of knowledge, Trill Black, a channel I have come to love. You must follow him. Camjaverse specializes in scientific research supporting Black history. Dr. Nancy Bird, whose genetic studies are helping revive a significant amount of African and Black history. Huge thank you to all my supporters. You guys are the true heroes. You are the golden staff of Tutankhamun, the rhyming verse of the hymn to Aten, the strong thread of the Nubian bow, the war counselor to Thutmose III, the wheel of Amenhotep's chariot, the scribe to Queen Tiye's scarab, the sail on Queen Hatshepsut's ship. I salute you all. Join us and see how those who are said to be without history birthed civilization itself.